Nevermore. Nevermore. Now, in all the things that could or might be considered horror, maybe it's because of the modern sensibilities of us in 2023. But who out there in chat might have an idea about why this poem is a piece of horror writing? If you think about it, the idea is really simple. I mean, there were no skeletons. There's no blood splatter. There wasn't a big knife plunging down into someone. What made and still makes that poem by Poe a piece of horror? And if the piece... Hi, Tony. If you're unsure about the content of the piece itself, what about the way it was presented? An idea? Ah, so Lunar Nightwolf does bring up a good point as well. In some cultures, the raven is considered a harbinger of death. That's so yes, that plays into it. So we have a figure, while not overtly bloody, not overtly violent, carries an aura, a stigma, a preconceived notion of death. Ah, Heretic is saying that it's acting as a psychopomp. And, I mean, that's a little bit big for Wordle, but if you all want to look up psychopomp, that is an excellent word to know and use and to keep in your repertoire, especially if you are a role player or a story writer. Yep, Tony says Odin's ravens were messengers and observers. Well, tell you what. Let's jump into the concept, the mood of horror. And maybe what you'll find there can answer some of those questions about why that poem is a piece of horror. And it's not just Christopher Lee's amazing voice, although, I mean, maybe the tone also. The tone also does set up for the emotion. Ooh, oh, wait a minute. The emotion. The emotion. As always, everyone, Wikipedia is excellent to consider. Might be a jumping off point to other things. However, never, ever, ever use Wikipedia as a primary source. If any of you out there are still pursuing some level of education, such that you need to write a report and have a bibliography in the back of it, if you're not getting marked down for using Wikipedia sources, then maybe I have to talk to your teacher. That said, in the grand scheme of things, referencing horror fiction on Wikipedia is not going to tip the world on its end, and of course we'll all just fall off into space. Horror is a genre of fiction that is intended to disturb, frighten, or scare. Right here. There is an intrinsic emotive direction to the story. Whether it's a role-playing story you're going through, or it's something you're personally reading, or you're sitting and listening to, as we did with that video. Horror is often divided into the subgenres of psychological horror and supernatural horror, which are in the realm of speculative fiction. Oh, well, Shalala, thank you very much. Well, let's see. If you want to go check someone out, Shalala, that is really nice of you to do a Twitch crawl and to, check out other streamers in this category. People who might be conducting a workshop to teach map making, storytelling, others who might be teaching how to paint minis or do something along those lines. Support those who are here to teach and help unlock, and help unlock the imaginations of so many others here. If there is someone else to go to, well, I don't know. I will trust you to look around, as I want to continue delving into this. There you go. If you want to follow Kragar's suggestion, then you can do that as well. But thank you. So, define a horror story as a piece of fiction in prose of variable length, which shocks or even frightens the reader. No, you're fine. Thank you for dropping by. I appreciate it. Or perhaps induces the feeling of repulsion or loathing. Horror intends to create an eerie and frightening wait a minute. This is another important word. If y'all are taking notes, atmosphere. Atmosphere. Is this what we do in 2023? In the early 2020s? Atmosphere. Is the biggest key to horror. Now, there's more here. Read about it, or don't. There are many examples, and especially if you want to start dipping your toes into this genre of story and storytelling, and you want to run it through a game like Call of Cthulhu, these are examples of things you can read. You don't have to just read Call of Cthulhu or any Lovecraftian or extended mythos author's tales. Will it help? Of course. Is it necessary? No. Have you read any of these titles that you've seen? Not even just going back a century or two. What about Psycho? Now, you might be familiar with the film. In 1981, Thomas Harris wrote Red Dragon, introducing Dr. Hannibal Lecter. In 1988, the sequel to that novel, The Silence of the Lambs, was published. There's a lot here, and this is that jumping off point. But let's get a little bit more specific. And if you love chasing those Wikipedia rabbit holes, boop 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 boop. There's all sorts of things that you can delve into. Now, this, I'll provide it as I am referencing it, and this is sort of a live bibliography here for you all. But primarily, and let's bring it back around to Lovecraft here. Supernatural Horror in Literature is a 28,000-word essay by American writer H.P. Lovecraft surveying the development and achievements of horror fiction as the field stood in the 1920s and 30s. The essay was researched and written between November 1925 and May 1927. If you want to read it for yourself, it is all right here. This in itself is a time capsule, as well as an interesting way to learn about it from the inside from someone who was delving into it, and arguably had a life filled with it. IRL, not just in fiction. And this essay, of all the 28,000 words, might have a quote from Lovecraft with which you're most familiar. And that is the opening line. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Now, if you go on to read, this itself is not a horror piece necessarily. It is a piece on horror. But this is, you can go inside the education experience expressions of horror from someone of that era, in that time. And this opener is strong and memorable, as it is the backbone of horror. Emotion, and especially the unknown. If we touch back on what we talked about in the first workshop segment, why is it in Dungeons and Dragons, skeletons aren't necessarily a scary thing? Is it because skeletons have, I don't know, like 15 hit points? Maybe in your world, you also know that skeletons are vulnerable to bludgeoning damage. And that they operate on a type of magic called necromancy. With necromancy, let alone magic itself, being known and possibly even quite common. Any farmer can tell you about, they may not be able to practice magic, but can tell you, oh yeah, a magician did it. In that example, in a Dungeons and Dragons world, in and out of the game, skeletons are not as scary. You know that you're supposed to fight skeletons, as it's a tactical game with a tactical map and miniatures and everything. And it can be thrilling, don't get me wrong. And you might have a fun time feeling scared for your character. I'm not going to diminish that. I would be very hypocritical if I did. But when you come over to a game like Call of Cthulhu, and you see that same skeleton, why is that scary? Because magic shouldn't exist. Skeletons shouldn't move, at least not without obvious wires and contraptions. It is the thing that is doing something when otherwise it should not. It breaks and shatters the norms, the expectations of player and character alike. They can be, Tony. The angels and the other celestials can, though the common bend maybe it's just a lower hanging fruit to say angels are good and devils are bad. That being said, uh, it's interesting if you break down the demographics of the players who pilot certain characters, and possibly why concepts like tieflings are very popular. And this is said in a very neutral way. I'm not making fun of anything or anyone, or like a well, yeah, you just know kind of a thing. Uh, there are ways that are to use symbols overtly, or because it's the most known and easily accessible quantity. That is a phenomenon that can be called the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic. And depending on how deep anyone wants to go with something, sometimes it's just easier to say, I'm playing something that's a devil, and so, I'm going to be evil. Or I should be evil, but I'm not. I'm the good guy. Or you get into, we can have fun with like, all the OCs that I have. Well, I'm half angel but half devil, and I'm also a half human but a half cat person, and I can use magic, but I don't like to use magic unless it's an emergency, and only then it's healing and to save lives. So I can't wear armor, but I can also never be damaged. I don't know, you can get into contrivances and things like that too. But it's generally easier for people to comprehend devil bad, angel good. But celestials, and I mean, what is radiant magic in Dungeons and Dragons but radiation? You're microwaving people with your radiant power. It might look like sparkles. Heck, put a piece of... Don't do this at home, by the way, everyone. Don't do this. Put a fork in a microwave and watch it sparkle. Ooh, the stars of the gods are smiling on us. I've manifested them in my microwave. You can also do some cool stuff with grapes, where microwaves form a plasma, but that's a whole other experiment. So that's the norm. However, Tony, I will say, if that is an expectation, therein lies fertile ground for anyone to tell a story of suspense, of horror. When you realize that the celestial beings might actually be closer to the elder gods in the Cthulhu mythos. They may not really be benevolent, chronically good guys. It might just so happen that they do less overt things. Doesn't mean that they've stopped doing things at all. It might be either more covert, or the things that they do tend to align with whatever the culture or civilization is that's encountered them, and so it's accepted as good. When another culture might look at that and go, that's terrible! You worship or you see these things as a messenger of your god or gods? And they endorse this? But we're talking about emotion, even still. So here is more of a scholarly treatise on horror, and I would urge you all to give it a look as well. Read through it, especially if you want to understand it a little bit more. Now, if you have not delved into horror and or mystery, Well, number one, just like with any other system, Pathfinder or even Cyberpunk, has pre-written modules, stories, published things that if you pick those up and you present what's there written, just like with reading any of those suggested books through the ages, you can get a better feel for how it operates. Mechanically through the system, yes, but how horror can build up and build up and build up through terror, and terror breaks into horror upon the realization. And that new realization resets the standard of normalcy, right? Horror is a genre of storytelling that taps... Oh, here, I'm going to share a link with you all. I like citing sources as I'm reading them off here. Emotion taps into the emotion of fear. Horror writing is sometimes categorized within the broader category of thrillers, but not all horror follows the thriller structure. Classic horror fiction, whether expressed as a novel, novella, short story, or film, will tap into topics that reliably frighten most humans. Common topics include ghosts, werewolves, vampires, zombies, serial killers, murderers, and the fear... Oh! The fear of the... Where have we heard that before? Anyway. I don't know, some rando must have wrote it. These horror tropes can often devolve into cliches. A downside of horror's popularity is that many horror books and movies recycle old content in uncreative ways. But when properly executed, horror stories can thrill audiences and even offer commentary on the human condition. So what makes a good horror story? At its best, the horror story taps into our fears by combining the ordinary with the shocking, the unnatural, and the grotesque. Many horror stories place their main character in relatable settings, such as a new house, a summer camp, a sleepover, a hotel stay, or a camping trip. Now, just from that list, I can only presume that at least among several of you out there, between 3 and 10 of you, horror stories came up with just those location prompts. The relatability of these settings primes the audience for future terror. The more the protagonist's point of view reflects that of the audience, the scarier it will be when the protagonist encounters moments of terror. For instance, it's scarier when a young family in a new house encounters a slasher than when a robot in outer space encounters a slasher. Why? Because most of us know what it's like to move into a new house. None of us know what it's like to be a robot in outer space. Believe it or not, many authors believe that the closest companion to writing horror is writing comedy. The two genres are related because both horror and comedy rely on subverting familiar situations. In comedy, the familiar is subverted by something absurd and incongruous. In horror, the familiar is subverted by something grotesque and threatening. And of course, we have like dark humor, gallows humor. There's a crossover as well. And even why we have those breaks in horror, that breather, that comedic relief. In horror, the familiar is subverted by something grotesque and threatening. Audience reactions to horror books and comedy routines come from the same place: delighted surprise at how a normal setting was subverted. So if you're looking to tackle the horror genre in your own writing, you'll be well advised to consider a few key points. Like all creative writing, the horror story has no set rules. A great horror story can be any length and tackle any subject matter. Here are some valuable writing tips. 1. Read more horror. Who's on the list? Poe and Lovecraft. Some rando named King? Oh, weird. I don't know. Can't say I've ever heard of him. But it doesn't stop there. Other noted horror authors include Shirley Jackson, Dean Koontz, and Robert Bloch. Meanwhile, John Bellairs and R.L. Stine specialize in horror books for young readers. And it's a great specialty that's led to some very lucrative careers because they're writing the horror to the people who would be reading it. And so it is much more horrific with what is comprehended in that age range or a general expectation, or why in the series of horror stories they're placed in different areas such that someone who might be more familiar with a rural setting or a city setting can still find horror, and then they'll say, you know what, I've read the one that's kind of closer to mine, maybe I'll take a look at something else. You know, I've read this, you know, cornfield one, I'm gonna read one about an urban setting. Goblin of Gygaxanor recommends Frederick Brown. Remember that horror can transcend genre boundaries. Many contemporary writers, including Joyce Carol Oates, Chuck Wendig, and Neil Gaiman, don't limit themselves to horror, but frequently feature elements of the genre in their other work. So yes, read Carrie and the Telltale Heart and the Goosebumps series, and watch Halloween and Rosemary's Baby, but also take time to explore the work of horror-adjacent creators. Yep, Lisa, exactly. Focus on your own fears. Much like comedy, horror benefits from authenticity. Horror benefits from authenticity. If you're scared of something, and you can write about your own emotions, that is going to drip feed into the characters. As wildly different as the characters may be in personality and development, you're writing from an understanding of that fear. In Essays on Writing Horror, Stephen King has written about how the process helped him overcome a litany of personal fears. His know-how was born of experience. So get personal. If you can scare yourself, you can probably scare an audience. Now, in opposition to trying to write the next national bestseller or the script for a movie that will see a worldwide release, if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, you can keep it super close and super personal, as you may understand your players better, or you can keep the tone, the atmosphere, the setting, everything on that more personal level, as it's easier to write a successful presentation to, say, 4 players than it is to try and make $400 million at the box office. Because not everyone gets scared by the same things. So if writing to specifics is potent, but there are people who just say, you know what, I do no horror. Absolutely no horror. Or people say, like, slasher films are a favorite of mine, and I'll watch them. But if you give me a psychological horror, I'm not going to watch that. They're both horror, but the audience is limited. So the broader you want, you have to approach things a little bit differently than more of an intimate, dining table role-playing session. Create 3-dimensional characters. Write characters whose character flaws feed the action of the story. All good literature and film contains well-wrought characters with desires, emotions, and a backstory. Hi, Diadams. The more human you make the characters of your story or screenplay, the more their missteps and bad choices will resonate with an audience. Now, I have a very good example of having a character with flaws with in horror. And we can actually start with something that is, you know, well, you're like, this is from so long ago. It is. It doesn't. So is The Raven as a poem. What what makes this situation that of horror?
Drag you out there and feed you those things.
Now, if we go back here, we saw character flaws. We saw people who are acting in a situation where you become emotionally invested, which is the whole reason why when there's a slasher chasing the young woman, she runs up the stairs to corner herself. Or you hear the screams of, no, don't answer the door. Here, if Cooper would have opened the door, it wouldn't have had to be knocked in and then left with only another door nailed to it, compromising the house even more. And he was scared. Now, he did the right thing, right? If only, I mean, selfish, right? Ultimately, he came out to help. But then we see, wait, what are you doing? There's zombies out. Of course, the rule in a zombie movie, you never say zombie. But all the same, we're witnessing this happen. There's zombies out there. Why are you fighting? Yeah, that guy was a jerk. Why are you fighting? You're hurting him. There's blood. Shouldn't you be fighting the zombies? We're seeing the emotion on display. And conversely, We have that intense moment, and we come back here. The music, of course, shifted. And now we see an almost lack of emotion, which in that void is the horror. The zombies, oh, I said the Z word, I'm sorry, everyone. They're just eating, they're eating the person in the truck. It's no big deal. I saw intestines, there was a liver, that guy's eating the liver. I think there's a foot somewhere. Now, also we talked about the elements of the grotesque. This isn't CGI, this isn't even modern makeup techniques. But if we look, it's clear that this person isn't a person anymore, let alone the cannibalism. Now we can, date things back to a 1968 sensibility. But we have characters that have their reasons for doing things and the consequences for those, which can raise the stakes and the emotion. But it's the emotion, and even the lack of emotion through the zombies. And of course, the atmosphere, the isolated farmhouse, the music that was playing, and if you listen really closely, the increased volume of the sound effects of eating the leftovers. Very wet, very schlorpy sounding sound effects. Unnaturally loud. But of course, we don't know what it sounds like to eat a person. Right? Chat? Right? Chat? Chat? We don't know what it's like to eat a person, right? I need at least one person in chat to confirm, please. All right. What? That's enough. I'm buying it. Yeah. Pardon. Now, if we look at some other things here that were brought up as well. Uh-oh, something disconnected. Hopefully that wasn't the stream. Test, chat. Am I still going? Something disconnected, I heard. Okay, all right, thank you. Recognize that the real can be scarier than the surreal. Sure, you can make up an army of googly-eyed bad guys or plant a severed head in your main character's bed, but will you really scare your reader? Not necessarily. In most cases, psychological horror sticks with audiences far longer than a jump scare or gross out moment in a slasher film. There's a reason that audiences couldn't stop talking about films like The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity, both of which were gore-free. Toying with people's real-life fears tends to scare them much more than just grossing them out. Recognize that the real can be scarier than the surreal. And we're talking about the concept of something like the unknown, right? The fear of the unknown. Well, let's try and invoke a couple different fears and see if we have this example of the psychological horror. The psychological horror possibly sticking than if you just jump scare or gross out everything. If you do it too much, it inoculates your players or your readers or otherwise your audience.
The hell's wrong with that box?
Dallas? You're gonna have to hold your position for a minute. I've lost the signal.
You sure?
Look around. Are you sure that it's not there? I mean, it's got to be around there somewhere.
Check that out, Lambert. You may be getting interference.
Dallas, are you sure there's no sign of it? I mean, it is there. It's got to be around there.
Dallas?
All right. Am I clear, Lambert? I want to get the hell out of here.
Oh, God, it's moving right towards you. Move, get out of there. What are you doing? Move. Dallas. Move, Dallas. Move, Dallas. Get out. Oh. No, not that way. The other way. God.
Dallas?
No.
Alice? You found this laying there. No blood. No Dallas. Nothing. How come I don't hear anybody saying nothing around
I'm
this
thinking.
place?
Unless somebody has got a better idea, we'll proceed with Dallas's plan.
What? And end up like the others? Oh, no, you're out of your mind.
You got a better idea?
Yes. I say that we abandon the ship.
What did we see play into? What are some fears that were on display? Now, again, if you're playing to a singular one, it might be good for a small audience. This, the movie Alien, probably wasn't targeted at a super small audience. But I think we can find some broader fears. Oh, not that. Fears of the dark, of smaller, tight places, of course, of being hunted. And all of this has been atmospheric. It's been build up. We see the titular creature in this scene for what, 1 second? And on top of that, you even get confirmation, no blood. No blood. We didn't have to spray a gallon under high pressure in 3D at the screen. And yet this is an example of horror. In fact, it's not even the little bit of subversion is it's actually the knowledge of the unknown, not just the unknown. We followed the trail of the alien through the tracker, through the things that have built up to that point. And we say, oh, he has a flamethrower. He knows the ship. All this stuff is going on. And let's see, what do we see here? We see... $121, $22, $20. All right, not quite there. Oops. I guess that, well, anyway, it was just on there. And it wasn't even a big gory mess. Now, horror can be a big gory mess too. But don't pressure yourself where everything has to be over the top splatfest. Where if they encountered one skeleton, surely 3 skeletons will be scarier than 1. You can do amazing things in storytelling with horror elements by keeping it simple, keeping it confined, and to play into these things. Now, for an added bonus, especially because there is that kind of cosmic horror. For people who pay attention, there are clues scattered around. Now, I'm sorry if this is spoilers for any of you who haven't seen 1979's Alien. So cover your ears. All of this is going on, right? We have the build-up. Dallas is huffing, going through the vents.
Am I Claire Lambert? I want to get the hell out of here.
Oh, God.
Listen to the
It's
tone.
moving right towards you.
Look at her face.
Move! Get out of there!
Get out of there. Look at her face. Look at his face. He's concerned. Right? He's leaning in. They're watching this box. They're watching Dallas.
There. What are you doing? Move. Dad.
What's going on in this scene? Now, it's true that there may well be people who are stoic in the face of danger. And, of course, as we learn in the beginning of the film, he is the new science officer. So maybe he doesn't have an emotional connection with the crew. But we see the rest of the crew panicking, leaning in, talking. And what's he doing? After Fob says he knows there's nothing that can be done, Kragar says that he's looking like he doesn't care. And we only see this for a second. So I suppose we've actually seen the monster for 2 seconds in this movie, or in this clip. We've seen the monster actually for 2 seconds. One here. Oh, did I pass it? Boy, I can't even seem to click into the correct second here. It happened so quickly.
Dallas,
That's the second time that we've seen the monster in the same clip. What do I mean? I don't know. But if you know, you know, and something like that, if you're providing descriptive storytelling, the way that your NPCs are acting or reacting to a scene are often clues. However, if the players don't pick up on it in the moment for the first time around, maybe at several points through the story, they'll see it enough to call it into question. And of course, Ripley does end up connecting some dots. But you can watch the movie and find out what happens when she figures out when she figures that out. So, what about the importance of location? We talked about atmosphere. Atmosphere is a big part of it, the mood, right? The house, the ship, the whatever. In that case, we blow up the ship, there's this thing on it, right? The importance of location in creating a scary atmosphere can be massive. Specific settings directly control the character's moods, motivations, and current status of safety. In Stephen King's The Shining, an enormous hotel that's been closed for the winter provides the perfect backdrop to explore the effects of isolation on the human mind. As the Torrance family wanders the empty halls of the Overlook Hotel, their minds in turn wander as well. They start wondering about themselves and the other members of the family. By the time the tension erupts into a murderous rampage, it is the setting that traps the characters in the madness, solid in its ability to breed a viscerally terrifying experience. Some settings can be so vivid in their presence that they almost become a main character of the story in their own merit. This. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on. It's the 2020s. This. And I brought this up, especially in the Vampire the Masquerade storytelling workshop. Treat your setting as a character. I don't know if Awkward Mancer is still here or if any of the brave crew of the Emmet from our Alien RPG sessions in the springtime. The Emmet was very much a character in and of itself. It was also the containment, right? The location of the story, primarily, but there was a couple others that played into it. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson features a house that is described on the first page as being, quote, not sane, unquote. A living, beating heart of impending doom. The house knows things, it wants things, and it can make things happen to ensure that it gets what it wants. In some ways, the story is much less about how the characters react to the setting than how the setting reacts to the characters. Other times, the more physical aspects of a lushly described setting are enough on their own to fill the reader with discomfort. In The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, the house is surrounded by dense marshes and shrouded with thick, drifting clouds of sea fog. It is from these marshes that the main character hears the sound of screams and spots a mysterious specter that appears and disappears around the grounds. The setting provides a darkened lens to experience the story through. Instead of just imagining the marsh, you can smell it, feel the heaviness of the humidity, experience the chill of the fog drifting around your ankles. There are many different ways to approach building an atmosphere through the location of the story and achieve a successful result. Tension can be made, held, and increased through placing the focus on the right details of the setting. The characters can be pushed to their limits and beyond when faced with circumstances unique to the location, propelling the story forward and spawning potential plot points to strengthen the novel as a whole. Well, let's check it out, huh? This is The Shining. A hotel? What? I bet there's going to be a ghost or something, right? Or no, the hotel is filled with zombies. That's the horror, right? Let's see what the location does, as that article talked about.
Out from out, wherever you are.
I can't get out. Let it out.
Let's do that.
Little pigs, let me come in. Not by the hair on your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in. Here's Johnny.
Now, the location is in itself an antagonist, and there's a lot of things that do come up over the course. You're kind of half right for like zombies or ghosts, but and so this gets back into the emotion about the character, the things that we sit back and say coulda, shoulda, woulda. We're getting emotionally invested. And there's a sign of good horror, which is also why, especially in the Call of Cthulhu book and what we often talk about in the workshop, look at your characters' backstories and their character sheets. What are they invested in? Family members? A literal investment of property, of money? Do they value something religious? Make it personal. But look, we have the look. This isn't a dark farmhouse of the Night of the Living Dead. This is brightly lit. Oh, if only she could escape. Oh, that window. She's so close. Like, she's skinny. She could fit through it, right? Come on, come on. We're cheering on. Just get out to the snow. You can escape through there. He can't fit. He'd have to go through the hotel. You can run away. Everything is brightly. The hotel's impeccable. It looks beautiful. It's not some rundown, like in the middle of a swamp thing. Solid construction too. It took a few swings of that axe. Also, in the description, look how he's approaching. Look at the eyes, the expression on his face. That constant smile, right? He's not having to go ooga booga with blood spouting out of his eyeballs and everything. If I can catch it. Just look at this right here. This right here. This still can very much capture a moment of horror. Just look. After 5, you've experienced something like this in real life. So you would have an even more personal connection. Oh, I did not know that, DQ. And we go back. She has time. He's playing. He's clearly crazy. Just get out. Come on, come on. Oh. You want to talk about location? You want to talk about the shot? What's so isolating about this? It's not a spaceship. If she leaves, she's not venting atmosphere. She can escape. But she can't. The window is stuck. And she's so close. I'm on the edge of my seat. Just crawl out. You can tumble down the snow pile. Get down there. We see Perhaps both monsters again. We see both monsters of this horror. And now it gets claustrophobic. The way she's holding the knife, she doesn't know what to do with it. She's not a martial artist. She's not a knife fighter. And she's clearly terrified. And so she's helping to sell the fact that, yeah, it's a guy breaking down a wooden door with an axe. This is another very good still. A moment of horror. And then there's just that lash out. That one moment of bravery, right? Now, you see a little bit of blood, but was that necessarily grotesque or gruesome? It doesn't take a lot to convey horror or mystery. But on that note, I've brought up mystery a couple times. And it is well worth mentioning. Hi, Sideshow. Welcome to the Hero Zone. It's worth mentioning in kind of a conclusion. Call of Cthulhu does involve, usually, mysteries. Something you unravel. Now, you could treat it like a Scooby-Doo episode, and it's kind of comedic, and it's all, just like Old Man McGillicuddy needed to scare the kids out of the mansion, or someone, like the uncle would inherit the house or something, whatever. Mysteries can be very complex and intricate, or they're oftentimes pretty simple once you actually unravel the obfuscation around it. And they can play well with elements like horror and thrillers and terror. And let's take a look and see if we can find out more about a mystery, and especially how the mystery can tie into horror. Yeah, he was a very demanding director. Everything had to be shot and reshot until it was exactly perfect. Lots of writers. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. Did I share is my story? Okay, yep, I did. Lots of writers enjoy mystery, horror, and thriller novels, but are not too sure what differentiates them. As a result, when they attempt their own, they might get stuck. As a scriptwriter in the UK who's worked on predominantly horror and thriller, plus as an author myself who has written mystery, I'm in a position to advise. First up, let's take a look at mystery. I had one of those English literature teachers who'd bellow, "To know a word is to define a word." This means I always look first at the dictionary. Here's what it says about mystery: a novel, play, or film dealing with a puzzling crime, especially a murder. The 1920s murder mystery, The Ghost Train. This is an okay definition. Whilst mystery typically involves a crime, Agatha Christie is still the queen of the genre. It's the puzzling nature that's the most important. Typically, there will be a big reveal at the end when the person behind it all is unveiled. Mysteries tend to be cerebral on this basis. So, not that you can't have emotion, horror plays much more into emotion as you're trying to figure things out. The mystery is much more of that logic of the figuring out, of the unraveling. And so that's where you're going to find the Venn diagram overlap of mystery. But horror, here's what the dictionary says about this one: a literary or film genre concerned with arousing feelings of horror, of a horror film. In other words, we want to be scared by horror. Well, that tracks. So far, so good. Horrors tend to lay out the potential threat from the beginning: a creature, a serial killer, a haunted house, etc. This means in a horror, we are, and by the way, pay attention to this, and especially the difference between novels and movies, and even a role-playing a horror. This means in a horror, We are principally voyeurs. We can't look away. We're stuck here with the protagonist. We're on this ride too, and our emotions are heavily invested. We sign up to watch terrible things happen to people. In certain subgenres, this is obvious. So-called torture porn movies like the Saw franchise invite us to witness murder and mayhem in ever-increasingly spattering ways. But even in less grotesquely flamboyant horror, the story will relate to a cultural base fear most of us have. Fears of our children, especially them dying. Fears of being taken away or sent into a hell-like place. Fears of being out of control. About words that I probably can't say without, consequences. Of being eaten alive, being dismembered, or burned alive. What's more, these types of stories feel unstable and make us worry for the characters in it. And yes, maybe even freak out when said characters are attacked and or killed. Or to look at, to be upset at Cooper, not just for, any elements of racism that was sort of like a sub thing there. Of the fact you could have prevented the door from being there's so much you could have done. I am upset. In fact, even though I should be scared out of my pants right now, I'm going to cheer on the fact that you just got beat up. You needed that sense knocked into. Yeah, great. You helped when it was convenient. But we're now emotionally invested. We're passionate, even if the passions are running pretty hot in that zone of horror. And yes, maybe even freak out. Okay, this is why groups of characters picked off one by one can be so popular in horror stories. Thriller. A novel, play, or film with an exciting plot, typically involving crime or espionage. A tense thriller about a diamond heist that goes badly wrong. This is less illuminating. After all, mystery can involve crime or espionage too, but there's lots of thrillers that do neither of these things. Well, now what? Wait. The key word is in this definition is exciting. As the name thriller suggests, our story just needs to thrill. This usually happens with some kind of deadline, as a race against time, a chase, if you will. In contrast to horror, the thriller invites the viewer to put themselves in the protagonist's place. We're not along for the ride as a voyeur. We are the protagonist. The story will ask, what would you do? Something is happening, but the characters in the center often don't know exactly what and or why. They will chase after this mystery in order to solve it, whether it's a conspiracy, a supernatural occurrence, an abduction, or something else. Thrillers typically relate to a more intellectual fear most of us have, such as our children being kidnapped, of abduction, being held hostage, of living in an unsafe home, having our identities stolen, being watched or persecuted in some way, of authorities who cannot be trusted, such as governments, teachers, or medical staff. This is why the lone protagonist in a thriller is so popular. And so what's the breakdown? A mystery needs a big reveal of whom is behind it all. Well, in a Call of Cthulhu game, that's often the nut of everything, right? The core of it. Mysteries tend to be puzzles that need to be solved. In horror, we sign up for the scares. And horrors tend to be voyeuristic. Horrors often focus on groups of people picked off one by one. Thrillers don't tend to be horrors, since horrors lay out the threat from the beginning. In a thriller, we sign up for the chase. Thrillers often focus on lone protagonists who are up against it. Thrillers tend to be races against time. Mysteries may be thrillers as well, or they may not. A big question. I believe we can decide what our novels are by asking one big question. Do I want to keep my antagonist hidden until the ending or not? This is getting to the crux of it. If you don't want to keep the antagonist hidden, you're probably writing a horror. This is because you need to establish the threat from the outset. If you do want to keep your antagonist hidden for that big reveal, then you're probably writing a mystery or thriller. Of course, this will depend on the story. We're talking generalizations here, but from my work with writers, it's surprising how often this question works. So if you're writing a horror, obviously your novel needs to be scary. A good way of studying the conventions of horror is by considering why your favorite horror novels scare you. Apparently so much ice and snow from the previous one. Again, we come back to the emotions, and can you, as the presenter of the Call of Cthulhu game, the novel, whatever you're filming, can you tap into something that you can feel fear about and understand to be able to portray in unique and creative and emotive ways? The story, or in my case, Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill, scared me so much it took me a whopping 3 weeks to read it because I kept getting creeped out. The story of a washed-up rock star who buys a ghost on the internet he then can't get rid of. The threat in Heart-Shaped Box is established early on. Hill piles of dread by the ton, making even the smallest moments seem frightening. As the chapters build towards a bloody crescendo ending, we can't be sure anyone will get out alive. If you're writing a thriller or mystery, and by the way, all of these can play together, there's just an interaction. So don't say that you're writing a horror, but it's a thriller, because you want to specialize the tone, and then you can ease into it. You can bleed into that next chapter, which takes that next step. Personally, I favor mystery elements in thriller, if not a full-blown mystery, because I love twists. This may or may not feed your big reveal. It's up to you. But if you're hiding your antagonist's true intentions, you need to be careful. One of the biggest issues B2W, I'm not sure what that is, sees when writers try this is they hold the antagonist back, but don't replace that role function with another. This then means there's a big fat hole where nothing happens. Devices such as red herrings, misdirection, working theories, a stooge antagonist, etc. will help you write a satisfying plot and, well, B2W, not BTW. It's referring to something, issues B2W sees when writers. In other words, stuff that stands in for the perp till we get the actual perp. You can do this no matter what genre or type of story you're writing. Immerse yourself in the mystery genre via mystery novels, movies, and police procedurals to guide you. In fact, sometimes even just reading court cases or summaries of court cases. Truth is often stranger than fiction, as Mark Twain would go on to quote, because the truth is reliant on what's known or possible, and fiction is not. That's why it's even scarier, because it does the things that we don't know about. So, an excellent lesson by two ways. Have a good night, Lunar. Thank you for joining us again. Is there a way that we can delve into a story that might have elements of horror, mystery, or even thriller? I have a clip, conveniently enough, that might be an example of that type of story. Let's take a look. Are you ready? Here we go.
Clear!
gotta be fucking kidding.
Now, if you're not familiar with The Thing, this is a story. There's overt horror, right? Like the gore, the things that had happened there, right? That was overtly horrific. There are those moments then between the crescendos of the gore, of the overt horror, when it is the mystery. Anyone can be the Thing. Who is it? Who can infect other people? Who is it trying to actually escape? And of course, let's not forget the setting of this story. The setting of the story, it keeps everyone confined. You can't get out of the base. You're in Antarctica. You'll freeze. You'll die. And so everyone has to be huddled. But there's a lot of places, dark corners, a lot of, isolated areas. And in a sense, it is that figuring out. There is a mystery. Or at least the thriller. Maybe not so much the mystery. And this has many elements to show that you can combine genres. And if you can present, it doesn't even have to be like this. It can be even a lot more subtle. If you don't like the overt gore, or if someone at your table doesn't, and you're like, you know what, that's fine. We'll work around that. You can still do it because horror comes in a lot of different flavors. Not just the green goo splattering and everything there, right? Yeah, I think that was my examples there. And so we have we have our presentation. We have our treatises on the types, and hopefully the encouragement that you too can do this. And it doesn't have to be, and I'm not saying this in a disparaging fashion, it doesn't have to be another high fantasy adventure where the horizon, is a beautiful place where you're overthrowing God after starting out as a level 1 son of a farmer. Those are fun. I enjoy fantasy. I've run fantasy. I'm in the fantasy industry. But don't let a familiarity, the fear of the unknown, prevent you from trying out these different types of storytelling and trying out systems that even can more readily help you. The systems aren't complex things to fight against. This is a set of tools for you to tell those tales more better, with greater efficiency, mechanics that have been, tried and tested. This is a 40-year-old game. Tried and tested. And so don't let that stop you from testing something out. From going, well, I've never been scared of skeletons because I'm not scared of them in D&D. So challenge yourself. If you're familiar with skeletons because you love hunting them in Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or whatever, I want you to come up with a reason for skeletons to be scary and run it and call it Cthulhu. And it's pretty easy to do, and often it's because skeletons shouldn't exist. I mean, animated ones, right? You start with something simple and you go from there.